Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into an organism that is completely rewriting its own story. Haemophilus ducreyi. For literally decades, we knew it as one thing, a classic STI, but now it's popping up in a totally different context, and it's forcing all of us to rethink, well, pretty much everything we thought we knew about it. And right at the heart of this story is this fascinating paradox. On one hand, Haemophilus ducreyi, the cause of Chancroid, is on the decline globally, but at the exact same time, it's re-emerging as a huge cause of chronic skin ulcers in children, especially in the tropics. So think about that. It's a declining pathogen and an emerging one, all at once. So to really unpack this, here's our game plan. We'll look at its evolution, then get into its microbiological profile. After that, we'll compare the two very different diseases it causes, see how modern diagnostics have changed everything, and finally, we'll get into the really tough stuff: treatment, resistance, and control. Okay, first up, let's just frame this incredible epidemiological shift. We're literally watching a pathogen pivot from a classic venereal disease to a major problem in pediatric dermatology. And, as you can imagine, that changes absolutely everything about how we need to approach it. So with that context, let's get back to basics. From a lab perspective, what exactly is Haemophilus ducreyi? Well, taxonomically, it sits right there in the genus Haemophilus, but honestly, it's a bit of an outlier. Genetically, it's pretty distant from the type species, Haemophilus influenza. In fact, things are so different that there's a serious proposal on the table to reclassify it into a new genus altogether, which really tells you just how unique this little guy is. Under the microscope, it has a pretty distinct look. It's a small, gram-negative coccobacillus, that classic shape somewhere between a sphere and a rod. It's also pleomorphic, so its shape can vary a bit. But in direct smears, it famously forms these long chains or parallel clusters, which gives it that textbook railroad track appearance. And that unique arrangement also gives rise to its most memorable descriptor, the school of fish. It's an image every single microbiologist learns, right? A true classic. But, and this is a huge but, here is the clinical reality check. Despite that beautiful textbook image, the diagnostic sensitivity of a gram stain for Haemophilus ducreyi can be absolutely abysmal. We're talking as low as 5%. The ulcers are so polymicrobial that finding that classic sign is incredibly unreliable. So the take-home message is simple. You just can't rely on the gram stain. So what about culture? Well, it is notoriously difficult to grow. It's a fastidious, facultative anaerobe, so it's picky. It needs X factor, which is heme, but, and this is critical, it does not need V factor, or NAD. It also wants a very specific temperature, 33 to 35 degrees Celsius, with high humidity and CO2. And even if you give it all that, it grows slow. Here's a great little bench trick, though. The colonies are so cohesive you can literally nudge them right across the agar plate. Okay, let's put that all together into its key biochemical fingerprint. It's a gram-negative coccobacillus, it's oxidase positive, and it requires X factor. But the two key differentiators from a lot of other Haemophilus species are that it's catalase negative and it does not need V factor. That negative porphyrin test just confirms that it can't make its own heme. Right, now that we know the organism pretty well, let's look at the two very, very different diseases that it's responsible for. So on one side, you've got classic Chancroid, a sexually transmitted infection, mainly in adults, causing really painful genital ulcers and often these swollen lymph nodes we call buboes. Then on the other side, you have this completely new picture, non-sexually transmitted skin ulcers, typically on the limbs of children in the tropics. The transmission is likely direct contact, maybe even flies. And these ulcers look so much like yaws that it creates a massive diagnostic headache for public health programs trying to eradicate yaws.
And that diagnostic challenge brings us perfectly to our next section, the absolutely radical shift in how we detect this organism. We're talking about the move from the petri dish to the PCR tube, from culture to code.
The contrast between these methods is just stark. Culture, at its absolute best, might hit 80% sensitivity. It takes days, and you need a live, viable organism. Compare that to nucleic acid amplification tests, or NATs. They're over 95% sensitive, give you results in hours, and they don't even need a living bug. It is no contest. NATs are the new gold standard, period. A really common and effective molecular strategy is this two-step process. First, you screen with a really sensitive target, like the 16S rRNA gene, which will pick up most Haemophilus species. Then, if you get a positive, you move to confirm it with a highly specific target, like the HHA gene, which is unique to Haemophilus ducreyi. This approach gives you the best of both worlds, high sensitivity and high specificity.
So we can find it. That's a huge step. But how do we treat it? Let's get into the guidelines and see where things start to get a little complicated. Okay, for adult Chancroid, the good news is that international guidelines from groups like the CDC and IUSTI are totally aligned. They recommend a single-dose therapy, which is fantastic for adherence. The choices are either 1 gram of oral azithromycin or a 250 milligram injection of ceftriaxone. Simple, clean, and effective.
Now, in places where chancroid is extremely rare, like the Netherlands, the approach is really pragmatic. Their national guidelines don't bother reinventing the wheel. They just refer clinicians to the comprehensive European guideline and strongly advise them to consult a specialist. It makes perfect sense. You ensure expert management for a disease most doctors will never, ever see.
And here it is, the million-dollar question. All these clear, simple guidelines are for adults with an STI. What on earth do we do for the children who are now presenting with these widespread skin ulcers?
This question leads us right into our final section, which really covers the biggest hurdles we face, both in the lab and out in the field: resistance and control.
For those of us working on the bench, this is probably the most crucial point of the whole discussion. There is a massive gap when it comes to antimicrobial susceptibility testing for Haemophilus ducreyi. I'm calling it the breakpoint void.
So what does this actually mean in practice? It means that neither EUCAST nor the CLSI publish clinical breakpoints for this organism. So even if we go through all the trouble of culturing it and we get an MIC value, we can't provide a standard susceptible, intermediate, or resistant interpretation. The clinician just gets a raw number with no clinical context. This forces them to rely on empiric therapy and, maybe most dangerously, it leaves us completely blind to any emerging resistance.
And that leaves us with this final, absolutely critical question for the entire field. We know this organism is genetically plastic. It has a history of picking up resistance. So how can we possibly monitor for resistance and protect our therapies for the future when we lack the most fundamental tool to do so: established clinical breakpoints? We sourced all the information for this explainer using Gemini Deep Search, and you can find the link to the full notebook document with all the citations in the description below. That question of breakpoints is a huge one, and I'd love to know your thoughts on how we can tackle this. Please leave your ideas in the comments. And of course, if you found this deep dive useful, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks so much for watching.